Hi everybody, welcome to Steepleview Farm. I'm Mark Carey. You know, earlier today, it's the Saturday before Father's Day, and I wanted to garden, but it was pouring down rain. So I decided to come out into the high tunnel and use the roof of the high tunnel as an excuse to continue to garden. And today I pruned my tomato plants. Now, a lot of people came to us this year and bought tomato plants, and I told you when you bought your plants that there's two different types, basically. Determinate and indeterminate. Determinate tomato plant is predetermined to be about a certain size, 4 or 5 feet tall, and it's going to be more like a bush. An indeterminate plant is really a tomato vine. It can grow very long. Some of them get 10, 12, 15 feet long, and they need to be staked, they need to be trellised, they need to be supported as the vine grows. The fruit that develops on it can be very heavy and break the vine and break it off, do damage to the plant. So you need to do that. But in order to make the plant produce high quality fruits, some people say you need to prune or sucker your indeterminate tomato plants. So I thought, well, you know, since I sold everybody so many plants this year and a lot of people asked about the differences, maybe today would be a good day for me to not only take care of my own high tunnel and my own tomato plants, but along the way show you a few things that I've learned and maybe pass along a little knowledge. So stay tuned. We're going to show you a little bit about how to prune and sucker and treat your indeterminate tomato plants here today in the high tunnel at Steepleview Farm. And later on we'll show you in another episode how we're trellising our tomatoes both in the high tunnel and in the field. Now, I shot most of this video with my iPhone because I was rolling around on my little cart and working on the tomato plants. So bear with me while we use the iPhone to show you how to prune your tomatoes. This is a fairly typical tomato plant. This is a San Marzano tomato. It's a plum type tomato used for sauces. It's a favorite of Italian chefs. And San Marzano, we started these from seeds. To be quite frank with you, I wasn't sure they were even going to take off. But this is kind of what the tomato plants look like after they start to grow and get a little size to them after they've sprouted out of the trays and out of the seedlings. And this is the grow that I haven't pruned yet, but I'm going to show you down this way, and you can see the difference between these tomato plants down here, how bushy they are, and those that I've already pruned, which are these up here. If you can see, these are more open at the bottom, and you can see all the prunings that are out there. See how this tomato plant right here is kind of open and nothing touching the ground, whereas the one next to it, the same way. And then we get into the bushy one. Well, let me kind of show you what I do to these tomatoes to prune them. This is kind of a side view of an unpruned tomato plant. And if you look right down here, you can see that despite my best efforts, there's 2 or 3 sprouts. There's one coming right out of the ground right there, and there's one right here pretty low. And all of these are going to have a tendency to want to stay in contact with the ground. And if you're familiar with Fusarium wilt, well, that's a disease that's spread by a fungus in the soil, and it splashes up on the leaves and eventually affects the whole plant. So I'm going to take all those off and end up with a stalk up to about here or so without any branches on it at all. I do need to be careful when I'm pruning this plant that I'm leaving the main stalk and not pruning it off, and sometimes it's a little hard to tell where that is. So that's why I've waited until the main stalk develops some fruit clusters. And if you look over here, there's a fruit cluster right there, and here's another one starting right up here. So now I know that this is the main stalk coming up here, and that's the main stalk that continues up that way. Even if there were fruit clusters on any of these other suckers coming out, I'm going to take those off because I now know that this is the main stalk identified by this fruit cluster and another one coming out a little higher. You never want to sucker above a fruit cluster. You always want to sucker below, and the safest way to do it is not cut out any suckers until you're below the second fruit cluster. A lot of people will tell you that it's okay to sucker a plant just kind of like by pinching it off. When these plants get to this size, to be honest with you, some of the suckers have already started to develop and they're pretty stout. Yeah, they'll snap off sometimes, but sometimes you can damage the plant. So I'll use a set of clippers on the bigger stuff and make a nice clean cut. So if you look down inside this plant right along the ground, you'll see there are a couple of stalks that are kind of coming out of the dirt. Well, I'm going to go ahead, take my clippers, and cut that off. This one is really just too low, too much in contact with the soil. I'm going to move around the plant. There's another one on the back side. I'm going to take that off. Then I'm going to work my way up the plant. I now know that this is the main stem because we followed it all the way up and saw that it had a fruit cluster. So I'm okay to take anything off. Now see, this right here is a leaf and it's in the dirt. And what's above it is a sucker. But that sucker, to be honest with you, has already become too stout to try and break off by hand. If I did, I might damage the plant. I'm going to work my way on up, knowing I'm still leaving the main stalk. And since this leaf here is hanging down a little bit, I'm going to take it off too. And as you can see, the plant is now starting to look a lot different. I've taken all that off. Now I can start pinching off some of the suckers as I work my way up. Now that I've got the plant opened up and I can see a lot more of it without all those other branches, I'll look in here and I'll see this little sucker in here. I know it's below 2 fruit clusters, so it's safe to pinch that off, and I'll take that one off. And down here's another little one, and I can take that off. And over here's another little one, and I can pinch that out of there. And now, for the most part, this plant is wide open. It's got plenty of leaves left on it to help develop nutrients, but it's going to put all of its efforts now into producing fruit and to growing taller. It's an indeterminate tomato plant, which means we're going to have to trellis it, and we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. I had to learn all of this myself, so I'm more than happy to share what I've learned with people because, I mean, there are a lot of you out there that already know these things, but some of you don't. Let me show you a regular tomato plant. This is one of the San Marzano tomato plants that I'm pruning today. And if you look down through here, you're going to see a number of different structures. And as we look through the plant, you're going to see all these things growing out that look like leaves, and everybody thinks they're all leaves. Well, they're not all leaves. Some of them are leaves, and some of them are suckers that weren't taken off soon enough. Let me show you the difference. For example, right here, off of the main stem, you can see the main stem, and we know it's the main stem because there's a fruit cluster growing out of it. This will become flowers, and the flowers will become tomatoes. This is the main stem right here. Growing out of the main stem is a leaf, but right there in the armpit, right in the crotch of the leaf, is a little growth, and that is a sucker. I'm going to pinch that out. Safe to pinch out because it's below a fruit cluster. But if you look right below the fruit cluster in the crotch of that leaf coming out, you see a little bit bigger sucker. Well, that also is a sucker. Now let's look down inside the plant and see what we see. And way down in here, we see leaves, like right there. There is a leaf coming out right there. And in the crotch of that leaf, there is another growth that if you follow it up, it kind of looks like leaves too. But in reality, that growth right there was a sucker. Just like this little one right there, but it was allowed to grow. So even though this going out here is the leaf, this right here was the sucker, and a sucker becomes a vine of its own. It becomes its own independent plant, as you can tell, because it has leaves of its own coming out. So how do we take off a sucker that's that big with a leaf coming out? Well, let's follow it up and see what it's doing. It may actually be producing fruit clusters of its own, and sure enough, if we get to the top and we look right here, this vine, this new vine, which is growing out down here, which is a sucker. Let me move this leaf out of the way so you can see it a little bit better. There it is, growing out of the crotch of a leaf, comes all the way up, and the farther up we get, voila, there is a fruit cluster of its own. So this would be its own plant. Some people say, well, why not just leave it, let it grow, you'll have more tomatoes. The answer is because I want a one vine plant. Easier to trellis, easier to tend to, easier to maintain, and I don't have vines going everywhere producing their own suckers that I have to take care of. So I'm going to cut that out, and I'm going to use a pair of pruners to do it. Now before I cut that sucker off, I pruned some of the leaves back so that you can see it a little bit better. But as you can see, there is a leaf that was growing out of the main stalk and a sucker that grew in the crotch. It was allowed to grow, and it has now become a rather large stem. To take that out, in my opinion, with your fingers, risks damaging the plant. And so I'm just going to reach down in here with a pair of sharp pruners, clean pruners. I wipe them off every time to make sure I don't get any dirt on them, and prune that off, and that goes into the compost pile. Okay, so now here's that same plant that we were just working on with the suckers and all the other stems that were touching the ground cut off. I've allowed the leaves to continue to grow, and I've gone into the crotches, and I've pulled out all the suckers, but I made sure I didn't do it unless I was below a fruit cluster, because this fruit cluster tells me this is the main stem. That sucker right there, I will probably take out, but I'm going to wait until I get a good representative fruit cluster somewhere further up on this stem before I do it. I always like to sucker only below the second fruit cluster, but that's a preference of mine. Okay, as you can see, I've pruned quite a bit off of these tomato plants, and they look quite Spartan. Sitting here, sparse with big stalks sticking up out of the ground, and not a lot of leaves on the bottoms. But that's okay. That's exactly what I was after, because I want these plants to not have leaves that are touching the ground. I don't want dirt splashing up on them. I want to be able to clean underneath them, to weed them. And even though we end up with a lot of greenery here on the ground inside the greenhouse after we've pruned them, it's all going to the compost pile, and none of it's going to waste. It's the way we do things here at Steepleview Farm, and so far, so good. Okay, everybody, well, that's a little bit about how I prune and sucker my tomato plants. I hope there was something that I was able to tell you that you'll find to be of some help in the future. There's more than one way to do all of this, and everybody has their own methods. I found this one to work very well for me, and I hope that you'll maybe be able to use some of the tips that I passed along today. And if you've got tips of your own, by all means, please get in touch with us at our website, www.steepleviewfarm.net. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, and we really look forward to seeing you here at the farm when we have our Saturday Farmers Market at Steepleview Farm. Every Saturday all summer long, we're open from 9 till 4, and we'd love to have you come visit. And of course, if you want to make a farm visit and come see anything that we're doing here, or be a part of what we're doing, just get in touch with us and make arrangements. We'd love to have you come down here, and we'd love to be of service to you. So thanks for watching. We hope that some of this helps, and happy gardening.